Hey, thanks for checking out Next Level Carpentry. You might wonder why a carpenter's got a video thumbnail that talks about tattoo removal, but as a contractor, I get called on for all sorts of unusual things, and in this case, I've got to remove this designer's nightmare gone bad from a wall, and I can't think of a better way to describe this sort of task than removing a tattoo. There's a picture here of what this wall used to look like before I started. And you can see it was a wonderful idea for somebody, but like a tattoo, it's wonderful until it isn't. And now that it isn't, it's my job to remove it. And the typical way for removing this sort of stuff is to tear off the sheetrock and start over. But on this job, there's a special hand-troweled texture on here that matches the rest of the walls in the residence. And I don't want to have to duplicate that texture. So my mission was to remove this pattern from the wall while preserving the texture. And it turns out it's a lot tougher than I thought it would be. As you saw in the picture, the whole wall used to have crisp edges like this with squares and crosses throughout, and I've spent a good 20 hours scrubbing away these paint lines because just painting over this, even though I can bury the dark color, the lines are going to show and the thing never goes away. It's like putting cosmetics over a tattoo. They're still there. I learned early that it wasn't going to work to just sand these edges because that will take down the texture at the same time. So instead of having crisp paint lines, I'll just have fuzzy sanded lines spoiling the texture on the whole wall. But my goal still remained clear: to remove this pattern and paint the wall matching colors to the side walls as if this tattoo was never here. And my determination led me to a system with tools, supplies, and techniques to get this done to where all those crisp paint lines are gone away. Hopefully no viewers ever have to do something this drastic. I would suspect in many cases there's just a couple of stripes or maybe one horizontal line that if you could remove that line, it would save you from retexturing the walls, etc. And anytime there's texture on the wall at all, the solution isn't just skimming and sanding because that changes the texture. If it's a flat wall, yeah, great, you can skim it, sand it, and start over again, which is kind of what I was working with here. But I'm not. So before I tackle this last set of crisp lines, let's go back to the shop and I'll show you the tools and supplies that I'm using because it's not conducive here on the job site. Then I'll come back and show you tips, tricks, and secrets for removing tattoos from designer walls gone bad. And here we are with the selection of tools and supplies here that I want to share with you if you ever find yourself in the painted wall tattoo removal business. And I'll tell you right from the start that this task really isn't for the faint of heart. If you've got another option, covering the wall with shiplap, sanding it smooth and going from there, covering with wallpaper, do that because this little system here, it's effective, it's not that tough, but the more of it you have to do, the bigger of a job you face. And believe me, if I had another option, I would have taken it. Definitely makes me wish I was working on this unique rolling pantry wine storage cabinet instead of doing this, but here I am. And none of these tools are uncommon or unusual, but the way that I deploy them is. We'll start with the basics. I've just got a masking paper machine here. This works good for protecting adjoining surfaces. I didn't bring my drop cloth in, but a good drop cloth on the floor is a great idea. Possibly the most uncommon tool in the batch here is this pump spray bottle. Some people watch me repair this handle in an epoxy video for fixing plastic stuff, but you pump it up, pull the trigger, and it sprays out a fine mist. I've got this loaded with denatured alcohol because denatured alcohol will soften latex paint. I fill this up good, pump it up good, and I can do quite a section of wall with this pump sprayer. Very convenient. So far on that wall, I've used about 2 full gallons of alcohol getting to that point. In lieu of sandpaper or brushes, I've settled on steel wool for scrubbing the sharp paint lines off. This steel wool is grade number 2. That has to do with the coarseness of the wire that makes up the steel wool. That turned out to be fantastic. I tried all kinds of Scotch-Brite pads and scrubbies and different things and settled on this, and you can see how that works. Naturally, maybe even first, are good rubber gloves. These are Venom Steel nitrile gloves. You can get these some places. Those are my favorite disposable gloves. I have got a sharp putty knife for a few applications on this. quantities of paper towels are a good idea, especially when you've got contrasting colors like I got. If the colors were more closely blended, you probably would use less towels. You'll see why. And then last on my list here is a bucket or a trash can, because removing the paint creates a lot of messy stuff, as you'll see. Two important supplies that I don't have shown here are elbow grease and determination. And you'll have to get those locally, because I'm about out after tackling this project. But now you know the general arsenal that's required to remove a tattoo from a wall. I'm going to head back to the job site and tackle that last little spot to show you how it's done. Thankfully, the magic of video editing lets me transport myself back and forth from my shop to the job site. So here I am back on the job, ready to tackle this last section. And believe me, I am glad to say that this is the last section. Every other time on this project, when I saw a light in the end of the tunnel, it turned out it was just a train coming the other way. But now I got this thing on the run, one more section to go. Rubber gloves on, alcohol sprayer charged up. And a good idea with this, because the denatured alcohol softens latex paint, is to kind of pre-spray an area ahead of where you're working, so it'll be pre-softening. So I'm just going to douse this whole area here. I should mention I've already got the masking paper on the side walls. That was done on all those. You can see that it gets a little messy in the process, and I don't want to get this stuff on that clean wall to make my job harder than it already is. Anyways, this is charged up and turned to a fine mist, and I can just give this area a pre-mist. As it starts to soften the dark paint, you'll see it run. That's what all these streaks are from. But I'm going to get the camera close here so you can see what's going on. As I get started, I'm going to mention the hazard warning. Denatured alcohol is flammable. Working in a confined space, I've got a window open here, a window open on the opposite side of the room, and when I'm doing a volume of this, I've got a fan going to constantly draw fresh air through there. Goes without saying, no smoking. And if the fumes bother you, what you do get, you can sure wear a charcoal respirator. But for this, I'm just going to give this another mist of alcohol to kind of get that paint softening a little bit. And then I get my main weapon here, which is that number 2 steel wool. And I'll attack these edges with some stiff scrubbing action. And I realize now that I could have saved myself a lot of video problems if I would have just saved one of these out in the middle of the wall, but I wasn't really planning on doing the video until it became clear that this system of supplies and tools was going to work pretty efficiently for removing these crisp paint lines. So here goes. With a fresh wad of steel wool and a fresh coat of the alcohol spray, I work on scrubbing right on that line, and I'm just using a firm push-up motion on that paint. You can see how it tears up that edge. The alcohol soaks right into that latex paint, so I keep applying it as necessary. Then grab one of many dozens of paper towels, give that a mist, let that soak for a few seconds, and then wipe it off. And you can see that the crisp paint line is gone. It's ever so slightly here because of that texture. I can take that away if it's going to be a concern. But that's the process for removing these lines. I start at the top and work my way down because of all the drips and runs, but this area has been pre-softened, so it's easy to do this. And I'm just pulling that paint off of there like that. The texture varies from one area to the other. In some areas like this, where it's a little more globby and close together, it's a little harder to get that texture out of there. I do one little section at a time because of how quickly the alcohol is absorbed into the paint and evaporates. I'm generally working from the second coat of paint onto the first one, pushing this direction. The whole wall was textured and painted the light cream color, and then this mocha brown, mocha whatever was put on here after. But this firm pressure is the best method that I've found for breaking up that line while preserving the texture. I just realized the camera wasn't focused as I did that, so I'm going to do this edge here. Same thing, just pushing from as long as I'm in this area. I'm going to get these two lines, and I only do one at a time because of how fast that alcohol evaporates and soaks into the paint on the wall. I'm using firm pressure on that steel wool, pushing pretty hard to scrape the paint off there. There's places where I use a little rotary scrubbing action in some of the finer texture. Every texture, every paint, every job is going to be a little bit different. But the technique is viable. And I'll jump in here for a minute and say, if you like the kind of content you're seeing in this video, I hope you'll subscribe to Next Level Carpentry if you haven't already. Most of the videos don't have to do with removing tattoos and paint work. There's a whole lot of in-depth stuff for carpentry and woodworking in there. And if you like that sort of thing, I hope you'll hit the subscribe button. If you need any of the tools and supplies you see here, like I said, they're not rare or uncommon, but if you need them and can't find them locally, there's links in the video description for Amazon where I'll list all these products and things from other videos on the Next Level Carpentry channel and in the Next Level Carpentry shop. There's also links to Patreon, PayPal, and Teespring where you can get t-shirts and other stuff like this if that's something you're interested in. And if you're motivated to go above and beyond to support this channel, there's a link in that video description for Patreon, where patrons make a contribution of ongoing support that helps maintain the channel in between video productions, which I always appreciate. Part of the reason I save this particular area to do for the video is because a corner is involved. As you know, when a wall gets painted, it's very typical to brush the corner first and then roll the rest. And what that means is that the corners along the wall and all along the ceiling, that there's 2 or 3 coats of paint here and there's just 1 coat of paint there. So as I'm scrubbing, it can really highlight the difference between those layers because there's 3 layers or 2 layers over a single layer. And so I learned a couple things for dealing with that, and that's where the putty knife comes in. And this will be a bit tricky to film, but basically what I want to show you is that I spray the area with alcohol. Again, I've been moistening this as I'm talking to give that time to soften up the paint. But once that's pre-moistened, I take a sharp putty knife with a square corner and just rub along here and remove softened paint from the wall. And you can see out here it comes off quicker than there because there's less paint right here than there is right there. And I'm collecting it on the putty knife and just wiping it off. Give this another coat. So what I want to do is remove as much of those additional layers of paint from the dark color in this corner so that when I go to the steel wall, I'm not scrubbing away that entire first coat of paint. And being careful not to scrape too much and remove any texture. And so far that's worked out quite well. I'll get this one while I'm at it. You can see one pass here goes through and it takes a lot of scraping here to get that cleaned up. But once I've gotten through to where that little edge is kind of feathering away, then I'll switch back. And because the effect this has on the texture, I haven't adopted this method on edges like this. It's just not worth it. This takes off the paint stipple a little bit. It's just an extra step and it's not necessary because of the even number of coats of paint. But that's what the putty knife does for these corners or anywhere else around door trim or whatever where there's extra layers of paint. It just gives me a jump on the process of smoothing down that paint line. There's a trade-off in how often you replace the wad of steel wool. The more paint that gets in there, the more of a mess it makes in the cleanup process. And if you own stock in a steel wool company, you can just go ahead and use a fresh ball for every little 12 inches of line that you do. But on this project, I've gone about 2 or 3 feet with each ball of steel wool, maybe a little more than that, maybe a little less. And that seems to be a happy medium. I probably didn't mention that I'm just using kind of half wads of steel wool. Seems like a good amount. And I hope you can take my word for it that those corners go a whole lot easier when they've been pre-scraped with the putty knife. And after doing the corners and the edges, which are tricky to get into, it's almost a pleasure to do a vertical or horizontal seam that's out in the open. And I'm going to zoom right in as I finish up the last 4 feet of this miserable painted tattoo wall. Now I have to say, I do find it a bit ironic that a quick search on YouTube brings up dozens and dozens of videos on how to paint stripe walls. But this is the first one that goes in depth on how to actually remove those tattoos. Well, I can't hide my elation at how thankful I am to be done with this messy part of this messy project. I've still got my work cut out for me in patching and touching up so that the homeowner's happy with the touch-up job and ultimately the paint job, but at least the worst of it's behind me. And finally, the light I see in the other end of the tunnel is actually the end of the tunnel and not just another train coming through the other way like it's been since I started the project. I'll close out the video with a thanks to all the patrons who support video production like this. They're listed here. These folks have gone above and beyond to support the channel, and I really appreciate it. New patrons sign up every week, and that allows me to justify spending more time to produce and upload videos for everybody else to watch for free on YouTube. So, for now, like always, until next time, thanks for watching. And the thought occurs to me that somebody's going to wonder why these folks decided to get rid of the design on this wall, especially the person that put it there in the first place, whatever they were thinking.